Thank you for visiting this little video. Today's subject is going to be relating to our liquid gesso. We carry four different types of adhesives. The first is the illuminator's bowl, which is an 11th century adhesive that was used throughout the Middle East. The second is a synthetic adhesive, which is called gold size, very reasonably priced, works exceptionally well. The third is our gum ammoniac, which is really the best gum on the market. What makes it so unusually good is the fact that it has a high tack, which means that you could lay the gum ammoniac on whatever you want to apply it to, and you could wait a week before you add the gold by breathing on it, and it'll activate very nicely. The fourth adhesive is the one that we're going to be dealing with today. This is a true calcium sulfate, which is a slate plaster-based gesso. It's about as close to the original Cennini gesso from the 14th century. There are certain exceptions which we're going to go over, the most important being that this one is a ready-to-go gesso. You just have to open up the container and give it a stir and you can use it. Secondly, which is an important factor, is that it is totally non-poisonous, whereas Cennini's does contain white lead. This does not. And finally, it works very, very well, and I'm going to show you how it should be applied, especially when you're dealing with any kind of a plaster-based subject. I like to put the gesso right in the center. And what you have to do at this point is to puddle it. And I puddle it out. As you can see, you could working with a ruling pen is really the best way to work with plaster. If you need to use a dip pen, I'm going to show you how I work with that as well. But this gesso has to be puddled out, and it feeds to itself, and it applies very, very nicely. And what happens, of course, is after you have covered the entire area, you're going to let this dry. And gessos in general are like turtles. They have a hard outside shell, but a soft inside body. So they deceptively may appear to be solid when in fact, if you put any pressure on them, you could basically present a problem. Once the gesso is dry, you can do a lot of things with plaster that you cannot do with any other adhesive. And what I like to do, which has it becomes necessary when the gesso has totally dried, and I'm talking about maybe 24 to 36 hours later, if there are any small facial imperfections on the face of the gesso, you can take a superfine sandpaper and you could sand it. Get rid of any little imperfections, any little marks, because what we are actually doing here is we are preparing the gesso to receive the gold. And this is what is called the application stage. So anything that needs to be done, any kind of minor surgery that needs to be done, gets done in the application stage while it is a gesso. Of course, once you add the gold, then that moves into the gilding stage. There is one other thing also, which is very important for you to know. And that is that once you're happy with the way this looks, and you want to now move into the gilding stage, the gesso has to be polished. So let me just explain this to you. When I say polished, let me show you what it's actually going to look like. You may see you can see the shine on the gessoed piece that is already dry. What you see is what you're going to get. In other words, you want that gesso to look like a sheet of glass. Because once you apply the gold, it's also going to look like a sheet of glass. So what we do, so that you understand it correctly, is you polish the gesso until you're ready to apply the gold, and then you burnish the gold once the gold has been applied to the gesso. Now this is very important for you to understand. Secondly, I want you to understand one other thing. The difference between this gesso, which is a liquid-based gesso, and Cennini's gesso is right here. Cennini's gesso is in granules, and it has to be reconstituted in order to have it work. Now, Cennini never used water to reconstitute the gesso. He used aged glaire, and when I say aged, I mean a minimum of 7 to 8 months. They certainly didn't have a refrigerator, but what they did have was they had a cold ground, and they would take the freshly made glaire and they would bury it until it decomposed, and decomposed very badly. La putrido is what they called it. When that happens with glaire, it then becomes an adhesive. But glaire, when it is freshly made, glaire becomes a varnish. So Cennini used an external adhesive when he was making his gesso and reconstituting it. Big difference. Now, let me point one other thing out to you. If for any reason you want to do some lettering, I just poured a little gesso into that container. We offer aged glaire as a product that we use for selling. And all you have to do is take 1 or 2 drops and add it to the liquid gesso, which is exactly what I just did. And you could take your dip pen, whatever dip pen you're working with, and if you find that it may require a little more or a little less drops, let me just get this so that you could see it. And you can rub with it very nicely. And you feed it, you give it more gesso. There you go. So, it's a very good product. If not in use, you refrigerate it. And the gesso can be refrigerated actually for several months, although the plaster can go bad under any circumstance. So the best way to use it is to apply it when it's necessary to be applied. And if there's any left over, you definitely refrigerate that until you're ready to use it again. Once refrigerated and you take it out of the refrigerator, you just have to keep it at room temperature for maybe an hour. Give it a stir, and she's ready for use. It is a wonderful product, and I hope you take advantage of it. It's available now in 3 different sizes, 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce, and we now offer it as a 1 ounce. Any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And thank you very much for visiting this particular adhesive video.